Number 25, by the way.
Oh.
This is number 25.
Oh, we should have a cake or something. I don't know. What do you do for like a 25th? What's the podcast version of a 25th anniversary?
25th episode?
Like
I don't know.
Rice Krispie treat. I don't know.
Yeah. I don't know. I didn't notice it till today. I was like, oh, we're 25.
Or like a I don't know, a keychain. Welcome to Cult Favorite, the podcast that does not illegally encroach on land. I'm Merinda Simmons.
Not knowingly.
But the podcast doesn't...
I've been known to trespass.
The podcast. The documentary doesn't talk about that.
Yeah.
We didn't have a good opener. We don't have a good opener.
It's not...
And also, I forgot my laptop, and so I feel like I'm in one of those like old-timey radio shows where I'm just going to be like looking at my notes, and I'm just going to like and drop.
Like we should have gotten like a grad student and just hand you just in.
No.
This just in.
Or turn the pages.
Throw them.
Kind of recital.
Throw them.
I don't know. Anyways.
But
that's our shitty opening.
Did you say who you were? We get that far?
Oh, did I say? I'm Merinda Simmons.
Okay.
Yeah,
and I'm Mike Altman. We're two religious studies professors trying to understand all these cult documentaries that you may or may not be able to stop binge watching.
I was very able to stop this one.
Yeah. So this week we have Cult of Fear.
Does it have a subtitle? No.
Asaram Bapu.
Oh.
The guy's name is the subtitle.
Okay.
Yeah.
HBO Max.
It's on HBO Max. It's also on Amazon Prime. I saw it was produced for Discovery Plus.
And it was this year. It's like it's brand new.
Brand new, which is
why, part of our motivation.
Right. We're trying to stay on top of these things for you.
Well, and trying to get
listeners.
Trying to get back to like more mid-lane, like
it has cult in the name.
Because we took a departure.
We did do Waco last time.
I don't feel like it was a departure. I'm still in the 90s. I guess because you went to the wrestling thing.
Yeah. I went to the wrestling
thing
on Sunday. It was all right.
There was a local wrestling gig.
It was all right. Rhino is ginormous. That man is huge. And I looked on Wikipedia and I was like, he's like 48. I was like, so he was like 23 when I was 15?
You sent me a photo and I zoomed in to like see what like some of the dynamics are. I was trying to like read that visual text. I should have said it's a gigantic human being.
Yeah, they did this whole thing where they started wrestling all through the crowd of like 4 rows of people. And all the kids just started following them around the little outdoor arena as they were fighting. It was amazing.
I don't get it, but that's okay. You don't need to explain. Let's explain illegal encroachments on land.
Yeah, talking about wrestling just tanks our engagement numbers, so we better stop immediately.
This is telling though, like our entree into this documentary is really just like a bunch of side notes. I don't know.
I think what we'll realize
edit this out.
Is that no,
that's what we'll do.
What we'll realize is that part of what's up with this documentary is it's not for us; it's for a different audience.
Yes,
in a way that the other ones were more by us. I mean, Americans.
I don't disagree, but I think it allows us to have a broader meta conversation.
Yeah,
as is my way. So go.
Before that, if you want to support the show,
right,
and help our engagement numbers not tank when we talk about Vince McMahon, you can.
You're so much more concerned about this than I am.
Yeah,
I don't know.
Even though right before we started this, I had a conversation about how I don't really care. I'm doing this for us.
Also, the numbers are good. I'm very impressed with.
We will never say actual numbers, so people can just imagine how good they are.
They're gonna imagine something that's much lower than it is because of the way that you talk. You're talking about stealing people's phones and tanking and stuff. I'm just like, dude, this is incredible. I'm very great. I think it's all gratuity. I'm very grateful.
Yes, it is all icing. But if you want to
support the show,
you can follow us at Cult Favorite Pod.
Needs it.
Cult Favorite Pod on the socials, and subscribe to the show on Spotify or Apple or wherever. Leave us ratings. Leave us reviews.
Drop page. Okay.
Um,
Content warning.
There, we'll have discussions of sexual assault because that's sort of the central sort of harm in this. The harm, yeah.
Even though it begins with murder.
Yeah, well, maybe we don't. I mean, yeah, allegedly.
So, what did you know before about Asaram Bapu?
I knew the way this came on my radar, because this was one of the ones that I pitched. Was I have a cult documentary Google alert,
right?
And I got a Google, and usually what I get is like websites like about cult movies that then have a document. It's not usually useful, but this came across because the Discovery India people who made it, the production team, had asked for protection from the Supreme Court of India because there were people hassling them outside their building after they made it. Mm-hmm. So that was like, oh, that's interesting. I wonder what this is when it comes out. And then, so then it got on our little schedule. And so I knew that.
Yeah.
And I knew I've done some stuff in the past on sort of the guru God-man phenomena in India and as it's spread into like the Hindu diaspora in the United States and around the world. So there's a lot of men like Asaram Bapu who come from the same time period, who, as you know, we'll talk more about like that whole phenomena, but I knew about that. I didn't know about him. So
I mean, yeah, I knew that like ashrams and gurus hold a prominent place in society. Like I knew zero things about this specific instance, but it's like presence inside of that bigger context is something that I'm hoping that you can help me with in a little bit.
I hope so.
Explaining that dynamic.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
Anyway, give us our synopsis.
So, all right, what gets covered? It's really about the rise of Asaram Bapu, his abuses and crimes, and then his conviction. Well, what doesn't get covered? A couple quick things. They don't really give you a lot of context for like Asaram Bapu and other godmen.
Bapu is like a title. It means like father, right?
Yeah.
I had to look that up.
Yeah.
But it made more sense.
And then, so they don't give you a lot of context, like sort of the whole guru scene in India. They don't give you. So one thing that's happened after this, Asaram is spoiler alert. He gets sentenced to life in jail. He's been in and out lately for various health emergencies.
Saw that. Yes.
So he's currently actually
because he's 83.
Yes.
And he was sentenced to life imprisonment.
And he's currently back in his ashram, one of his ashrams, and until March 31st. Mm-hmm. I
didn't know that he was able to go back to an ashram, though.
And I think this is scheduled to come out in April. So
there wasn't like house arrest or whatever?
No, it was, it was like, they called it bail.
Yeah, like interim bail.
Interim bail. So
for medical reasons. Yeah. But like that doesn't mean you're confined to like home or hospital.
No, and he wasn't supposed to have contact with followers, but he went back to his ashram. So there's a good bit of like, I think there's a lot of playing with he's still playing in the system in a lot of ways,
and then like, can you get in trouble for, like not following the conditions of your bail?
I don't think that anyone in this
anyway,
not following a court order seems to be all the rage.
Well, he's pals with the prime minister, so.
Well, that's they were pals. They had a falling out after the twins, the brothers or the cousin's death. And then
these are the two boys who were murdered.
Yes, we'll talk about that in a second. Okay, but the commission that we're going to talk about, actually, Modi was in charge of Gujarat at the time and appointed it, and then was like, we should distance ourselves. So and then came back. So, but that actually goes right to my last thing, is that we don't hear
all of that is subtext, and we don't hear about any of that.
We do not hear about all of his BJP and VHP. So BJP being the political party, the Hindu nationalist political party in India. VHP is a international Hindu nationalist organization.
Far right.
Yeah. Which we'll come back to that and get the comparative point. I have questions about that.
But he's very intertwined with political power in India.
Very much so.
Yeah.
As are most of these godmen, actually.
Mm-hmm. So, see, this is what we need more background on.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, so it's 3 episodes. I think it could have been one 90-minute thing. I think it could have been a little, I don't know. But, all right.
We will compress this into a 60-ish minute.
Here we go. Set a timer. Hold on.
We've already wasted too
I'm going to
much.
set a
Go.
timer. No, hold on. I'm setting a timer.
Ooh,
All right.
for 5 minutes? Let's
Yes,
see.
here we go. So episode 1, we are introduced to Asaram Bapu, a Hindu guru, comes to prominence beginning in the 70s, but really takes off in the 90s, 80s, and 90s. Builds ashrams all over India, and he's part of this larger process that we'll talk about in the late 20th century as the Indian economy liberalizes and you get a gap expands between the poor and the rich and the rural areas and the cities, but then also a middle class emerges, and a number of godmen appeal to that group. He uses cable TV to spread his sermons. I mean, it's very it's very televangelist.
I was going to say, it sounds like appealing to the poor, giving them some stuff that they
Jim
need.
Baker,
Yeah.
And so he gets involved with. So he starts selling stuff, builds this empire of devotees and ashrams, gets involved with Indian politics, very influential among the Hindu nationalist politicians. This all leads to the real sort of a story of the documentary, which begins with the disappearance of 2 10-year-old cousins, Abhishek and Dipesh Vaghela, from one of his boarding schools. He has boarding schools all over with these ashrams. And I think part of what's behind this, too, is the boarding schools are seen as a way into the middle class for a lot of his devotees' kids.
Okay.
So there's a whole. So
it's not just about like, if you are a pious follower, here's how to keep your kids safe from the corruption of the world. It's also
like, this is
interesting.
Like being a devotee is it's a certain kind of
access point.
So his boarding school in Mathura in Gujarat in 2008. So the boys disappear, and then a couple days later, their bodies are found in the river, I think.
And we hear from their fathers.
Yes,
those are
their fathers who were brothers, so they're cousins,
right?
And it's sort of the mystery of their deaths becomes the kind of ominous build to the second episode, which follows the kind of story of the death. The ashram administration won't let the family file a police report. This leads to a bunch of public protests supporting the families and against Asaram and the ashram. And then about 2 weeks later, there's this Guru Guru Purnima. This is why I did American religion in grad school and not India, because I didn't want to learn Hindi or Sanskrit. But basically, it's a festival day where you celebrate your guru, and so there's all these thousands of people coming to the ashram to see Asaram.
And this is like a something that's happening across lots of states in India, right? Yes. Like, this is not just belonging to him. This is a national.
But it's happening across the country. But this is the local instance of that, and he's giving sermons inside the ashram, and sort of he meets. So before he goes, he meets the fathers in a very kind of perfunctory way. There's video of this in this big crowd, and he's there. One of the fathers is holding the Gita, and he just sort of says like, "Oh, I'm sorry," and then kind of like walks away. It was very anticlimactic. And then after that, you kind of have the protesters for the family, and then all of these disciples who are in town, and sort of violence breaks out with people throwing stones and wielding sticks. And Asaram is inside giving sermons to a few thousand people, and he does this move that is the move all sorts of people make, of turning it onto the media and saying like, it's the media that is the problem here.
Right.
And this leads his disciples to start attacking reporters. And we hear from Gopi Manar, one of the reporters who really covers this story and who ends up being attacked by the crowd and ends up in the hospital. And
there's lots of that with whistleblowers and journalists
and so, there are calls for a commission to investigate the deaths. There's accusations that the deaths were a part of black magic being performed.
Shows up as an idea and then goes right away.
I think that's one of those things that the Indian audience, it reads to the Indian audience in a way that it doesn't read to us.
Because there was not like a satanic panic, or what?
Because black magic in that context is more about a kind of like either, and I was trying to listen to see if I could pick up, because there was no Hindi subtitles.
Right.
So if you wanted to try to figure out what word they're translating in the dub or in the subtitles, you had to like listen really carefully, and I don't have a good ear for this. So I couldn't pick up on it, but I think it was an idea that's more connected with sort of tribal rural religion, what we might think of as like folk religion,
Okay.
as opposed to like mainstream, in opposition to kind of like mainstream
Yeah.
capital H Hinduism,
Yeah.
right? There's my 5 minutes. All right.
You are halfway through. Okay.
Yeah.
That's all right.
So Asaram
I'll
is
stop asking questions.
no, please. Asaram is forced to come testify to the commission. Thousands of people come with him, and this is a trope throughout the thing that Asaram's like, "Sure, you want to mess with me? I've got thousands of followers outside,"
Right.
and there's one like they're very hungry, and you don't know what hungry people are going to do.
Yeah.
The commission lasts for 5 years, and in 2013, they finally find that there was no black magic, that the ashram is only guilty of negligence, and like nothing really happens. And this,
But it was like pretty evident. Like there was formal acknowledgement that it was murder, right?
yes, well, not. I don't think there was ever formal acknowledgement it was murder. There was some. I don't know. It seemed unclear.
Like the digging that I was doing outside of the documentary, because I had so many unanswered questions, is like blurring in my brain with what actually. Anyway,
but but there's like general sense after the commission in 2013 that like everyone's afraid to mess with this guy.
Yeah,
he has too many followers. He's too powerful. However, in 2013, a woman in Delhi accuses Asaram Bapu of raping her at his ashram in Jodhpur.
Mm-hmm. And she's a minor.
I should say girl. Yeah, I was getting things
right.
confused.
She's like 15 or something.
Which is a kind of point of debate, because there's a whole thing about like what grade of school she's in, and they try to make it seem like, oh, she was in grade 12. Well, no, she was actually
Parents
in 10.
are
and
messing with documents. Yeah.
We hear a lot of the story from a very interesting Chanchal Mishra, who is a woman police officer in Jodhpur, and really is sort of like leads the charge here in a lot of interesting ways.
It was like one of her first big cases.
Yeah.
Is what it sounded like.
And she talks about like choosing to be a police officer as a woman, like very like, I want to do this. So the sort of story of the assault is that this girl was at one of the boarding schools. Her parents were devotees. She's not feeling well. She's feeling ill. The boarding school people tell her she's possessed by an evil spirit, and she's brought by her parents to Asaram to his ashram in Jodhpur. Yeah. And basically left alone with him, and that's when the assault
so he could
happens.
Like take the evil spirit or whatever. Yeah.
So following these allegations, Asaram refuses to cooperate, makes a bunch of different contradictory statements, tries to blame the girl, refuses to be interrogated. His followers protest and demonstrate in the streets, and he continues to kind of point to them as a threat. Like there's one scene where reporters like questioning him hardly, and he's like, point the camera at those people, saying like, look at all these people, like, that I have here. And they finally decide to arrest him at his ashram in Indore, which is a different state from Gujarat. It's in
because like ultimately there are 400 ashrams devoted to right.
Yeah, 400 ashrams and 40 boarding schools.
So
and 40 million followers.
So when you say like the one in this, the one in that, like I just want to make clear, like this is a big. Like he does have lots of followers.
A lot of stuff.
Yeah.
A lot of followers.
I mean.
And a lot of these are spread out in like they're constantly saying like we flew here and then drove out to this village. Like these ashrams are not, not all in major epicenters. Right. So they go to Indore, and he's preaching to a crowd of 3,000 to 4,000 people, and they finally go in to arrest him, and it's sort of chaos. They're trying to get him out of there to the airport, even on the airplane to get him back to Jodhpur. The airplane is full of devotees. And the arrest sort of sets the stage for the big finish in episode 3. And episode 3 opens up with like a really important piece of sort of social political context, which is the 2012 case in Delhi of a 23-year-old woman who was raped by multiple men. And I remember when this happened because it was like world news. And it became this national moment in India with all of these protests and all these demands for greater protection for women and women's rights. It led to changes in sexual assault law in India. Yes.
in like 2013.
Yeah, in
where
20
like the whole definition of rape gets
Yeah.
revamped
Like,
and like more nuanced.
Yeah, when they talk about this at one point that like prior to this, it was only rape if there was penetration.
Yeah.
And I think there's a whole, and it didn't have as much protections for children. So the POCO, the POCO, which protection of children, something else.
And the age for like what constitutes a minor
Yes.
is raised from like 16 to 18.
Yes. Yeah. So
We don't get those details in the documentary, but yeah, there is that kind of like.
We get a little bit of them in retrospect after when they're talking about the verdict and sort of saying if it wasn't for this law, there wouldn't have been this verdict.
Right.
So Asaram is sort of publicly claims that so when this happens in 2012,
the gang rape that made world news. Yeah.
Asaram publicly claims that the survivor is the one at fault for the assault and that she could have stopped it in just a ridiculous.
We've heard this before from some of the people that we've talked about in other documentaries.
Yes. And what's interesting is this happens in 2012. The commission comes back in 2013 with sort of a nothing burger. And then the rape allegation against Asaram comes out. Mm-hmm. And there was a lot of coverage of his comments in 2012, a lot of which was like, you think that the thing he said was stupid. Well, do you know about these 2 dead boys? Mm-hmm. Like there's a lot of media coverage like that. Mm-hmm. And then you have the 2013. So the first sexual assault allegation is in August 2013. Then later, 2 sisters from Surat accused Narayan Sai, which is Asaram's son, and Asaram of repeated sexual assault at the Motera ashram that starts for one of them in 1997 for the oldest, and for the youngest lasts all the way till 2006, involving both the son and the father.
So just to be super clear, like there are 2 kids who are killed in some way at a residential school, but ultimately formal charges are never filed.
Right.
Meanwhile, there are 3 cases of like allegations of rape.
2 cases involving 3 people.
2 cases.
Yeah.
Right. So there's like these 2 sisters who are alleging rape from Asaram and his son. Mm-hmm. And then there's this minor in Jodhpur.
Right. And the sisters in Surat, the Jodhpur was sort of one event. The Surat is talking about multiple events over years.
Right.
And we also hear at that point the implication that like actually, and they're just one among many, they're just the only 2 willing to sort of stand up. And like that's the message you get in this sort of 3rd episode is like the woman police officer, the first girl who files accusations in Jodhpur, and the 2 sisters, and their defiance, like out there in front of the cameras, like covering their head with scarves, but like just saying like no.
Yeah.
And there's a point at which one of the father was like losing everything, and like maybe we shouldn't do this, and his daughter's like, no, we're gonna do this. And so that's really sort of the big, I think, theme. Narayan goes on the run, and they have to chase him down. The son.
Yeah.
There's threats from followers against journalists and investigators. One disciple of Asaram kills multiple witnesses. Mm-hmm. And so the documentary does like really emphasizes the strength and resilience of the survivors, and in 2018,
and the police officer like doesn't see her son for 6 years.
Yeah.
Because
she faces her own threats.
Because she's following this and like working on this case.
Yeah. There's an interesting part where one of the former disciples who he talks about walking and seeing Asaram and Narayan with women, and then realizing that all of their because they preach the whole thing about celibacy and all this stuff.
Well, and women are unclean, and
right, which is total bullshit.
Sure.
And so, and that's what kind of prompted him to leave.
Right.
But he compares it to the Mahabharata and these figures in that story, which is the story of these 2 warring families that are actually 2 sides of the same family.
This is like a myth. This is like a
Hindu
text?
Yeah, it's a Hindu epic.
Okay.
It's a Sanskrit epic.
Okay.
About it's, and the Bhagavad Gita, which people may have heard of, is like a piece of this larger story.
Okay.
And you can think of it like the Odyssey or whatever. But it's a story of 2 sides of the same family fighting each other for a kingdom. And he compares it to these 2 characters, one of which sacrifices themselves who's a woman who sacrifices herself to come back as a man to fight and kill, and one of the other major characters, and sort of this sacrifice of going through the pain of death then leads to this victory, and then another character who dies in a horribly tragic way at the end of the story. So there's this kind of, that's how he sees what all these women have gone through in the story in an interesting way. So in 2018, Asaram is sentenced to life in prison for the Jodhpur case, and then in 2023, he's sentenced to life in prison for the Surat sister case. Narayanan is also sentenced to life in prison, and they talk about the quote in the verdict. I don't know which one of the two verdicts it was.
It's the lawyer for the girl in Jodhpur.
Yeah,
says
that it was in prison till his last breath of natural life, and that was a huge deal because it's rare for these sorts of prosecutions. The idea of getting life in prison is
it was the first time post these new, like the revision of the penal code, like this was the first big case that was brought after that then like allowed for this kind of sentence.
And it's the first time, like there are other godmen who have been accused of things who have never been prosecuted.
Sure.
So this is another huge difference. One, like we could talk about comparison in a second, but
I've got some.
And even comparisons within India. The empire and the disciples are still going. 400 ashrams, 40 schools, 40 million followers.
40 million followers.
40 million.
That is literally the population of Canada.
Yeah.
I just want to...
Yeah, it's a lot.
It's 3 times the size of Belgium.
Yeah.
I mean, ish, but...
Yeah. It's... People don't really... I don't think a lot of Americans who don't think about India a lot don't think about how big...
And who talk about something called cults as like these very fringe marginal groups with like 40 people.
Right.
The size of Heaven's Gate.
Yeah.
Instead of 40 million people. And at that level, I am eager to explore what happens to the label cults and how, when we apply it to something on that scale, the dynamics are just doing something very different, in my opinion.
And I think, so one of the themes at the kind of the end of the documentary is the dangers of blind faith. Like that's the thing they talk about a lot, is blind faith. And also
as opposed to like super informed empirical faith.
Yeah.
Like whatever. Anyway, go ahead. 2020 faith. 2020 vision faith.
Well, and I think the
faith.
balance between, there's a line at the end about between wisdom and reason or something like that, right? Like, so this idea that there's some sort of balance there. Right. So yeah, that was not 5 minutes.
It's never 5 minutes though. That's just like a placeholder for us in our notes of like, let's make this a quick synopsis, but it's never that. It's okay.
What do you want to talk about?
Oh my God. Okay. So one of the things is what I was just like giving a little conversational on-ramp for, of like how and why this is a documentary about a cult. Is it just because it's a religious leader who's abusing people? Because we have one person, what's her name? I have to go through.
You can hear your paper shuffling. It's amazing.
That's fine. It just means that it's.
Are you talking about the 2 social psychologists that we have?
Isn't there just one?
Are
there 2? Who's the second?
I don't remember the first, so I can't tell you the second.
Alexander Stein.
Yes.
Dr. Alexander Stein.
Alexander Stein. There's another one.
She is a social psychologist. She is like the resident cult expert and like white lady about town. She shows up literally to say cults do this and cults are like this. And a lot of times you can anticipate that they feel like this and they're separated from families like that. And it's all of this like super vague rhetoric. And I'm not even blaming her for it necessarily, although it seems like it's very much her career to talk about cults.
Well, she was in a political cult in Minnesota.
There's
a book about it.
There's zero context for that or why she's there. She says nothing specifically about this group at all. She's talking about cults in general.
Yeah.
And we are left to do the work of saying this is relevant implicitly because this group fits into that framework.
Do you think, I didn't have this thought until just this moment when you said that.
Okay.
Do you think that they got that footage from something else and put it in, or?
I don't know. I don't care. I just know that like if the point is that like
yeah.
it's, I mean, yeah, no, it's a good question. I just don't, the fact that you can even ask that question, I think is part of the point that I'm trying to make. Because like if what makes this a cult is it's religion plus abuse, well then I have some literature to share about a lot of Christian priests,
or
and ministers,
or Bill Hybels,
and
or
like all. I mean, see
Southern Baptist Convention.
See also, a gazillion other examples. So I just so it's we hear, like you were saying, next to nothing about the actual religious teachings of this group. And so one of the things that I find interesting is that in the contexts that we are perhaps a little more familiar with inside the US, we hear lots of stuff about like, here's what they believed, here's how they came to believe it, here's what the teachings were.
Yeah.
And that can serve a few different purposes. Like on one hand, it could be like, look at how kooky it is to like, they believed in aliens or whatever.
Yeah.
On the other hand,
they cloned a baby.
They thought that Christ was coming back in a spaceship, whatever. So it can be an othering device, but it can also be a way to like disaggregate and distinguish something that is that we need to make unfamiliar and strange, that otherwise might fit into a context that is very familiar, that we do not want to make strange, that we want to keep, as like mainstream or sacred or whatever. And so one of the things that I was interested to hear from you about is like, to what extent this like figure, this ashram, this group of followers is or is not similar to the larger context of gurus in India, because we don't get a lot of that.
Right.
And again, like the way that we do tend to hear about it in these documentaries is also really problematic, because it's an othering device or whatever.
Yeah.
But
this is the question. I mean, I was thinking about the same thing of like, okay, if we think about these things as being about like us and them in a certain way, but like as viewers of this, like there's no us for us here, right? And so it's very hard to think about. I think I was trying to triangulate, like, is this about? So like, I think what's from an Indian perspective, the prosecution and the conviction is really, like really novel and like whoa, like that's the big whoa. Because I was thinking about, there was another Indian godman that I've actually written a couple things about back in the past, Satya Sai Baba, and he died I think in 2011. I want to say, but he, similar story, like comes up in the mix, gets really popular in the 80s and in the 90s into the 2000s, is building like hospitals and schools. But he also had a kind of a certain flair to him that was particularly appealing to like the rising middle class, where he would pull luxury goods out of his hair. Like he had a big kind of afro, and he'd like pull a Rolex out and hand it to people and like do these sort of tricks. But he was another god man or whatever, but also had accusations of like touching young boys that were involved in his disciples and all this stuff, right?
Right.
Never prosecuted.
Right.
Multiple times that he was investigated for for various like tax and financial crimes and things, but died in 2011 a free man, right?
Right.
There's there's definitely differences in the details, but like I think for the audience, the cult of fear and the cult language you hear from like the reporters,
this is what I'm wondering. Yeah.
Is a way to talk about. It's like I think it's a
Like,
certain,
was that guy called a cult leader?
not in,
But yeah, because maybe
by
there's
by the same secularist Indians that are journalists in this documentary, right? Like, I think there's a thing
okay.
about like the cult language as being exploitative God men. Does that make sense?
Yeah, but I'm trying to remember if the if the actual language of cult belonged to like was that employed by the journalists and the investigative reporters and
In this?
whistleblowers in this
Yeah, that's the guy. What was the guy's name? The one. There was one reporter
reporter? Does
who who used that word
he used
multiple
it cult?
times.
Okay.
Yeah, cult.
Okay.
And so I do think that part of this is he talked about these cultic situations, and there was one other uh, white social psychologist who Mara Einstein, who's in it.
Okay. I was wondering.
She's the
Yes,
MLM.
I did
She's
see
the MLM psychologist.
Yes.
As well.
Yes.
Who was
She
like
talks about marketing
and advertising.
How, yes. And
She does
how
the whole like all advertising is a cult thing.
Yeah.
So but I do think that like so what part of what's going on here is these god men in a way that's different from other
Gurus? Like
other gurus and other forms of Hinduism at the time. Like they're deeply invested in the idea that India is an essentially Hindu place, and anyone who's not Hindu shouldn't be there.
but,
And anyone
but
who's
the prime
Indian,
minister feels that way too.
right? Yes. No.
So-
yes. But that is not the case for these journalist folks and these investigators.
Sure.
And so I think part of the cult language is like they're borrowing this language from, I think, a certain kind of Western view, like
Right.
Western space, and then putting it here as a way to try to push people. Like it's to me, the whole thing is about like discrediting these godmen, gurus, and the VHP, and the like. It's.
But where does that live on this? Like, I assume that, I assume that like gurus live on a spectrum just like anybody else. Like, to what extent is the example that you just talked about is Asaram Bapu, like they're maybe eccentric, they're clearly abusive. It's, of course.
Yeah.
But like in terms of what their teachings look like or sound like in relation to larger guru culture or Asaram examples across, like,
I think no.
How are their ashrams different, or are they, or do you know?
Yeah, the way that these gurus become so big and popular is by peddling in Hindu nationalist rhetoric.
So that's not something that you would hear from...
Right. Like, so in some ways, it's like these gurus, I don't want to, it's might be too kind of like...
I'm asking, to
obtuse of
generalize.
a comparison,
Yeah.
but like, I would imagine them the same way we think about like evangelicals or megachurch pastors.
Yeah, but we don't call them cults. And so like I guess
we don't call them cults because they have a certain they have a different relationship to secular journalists and the relationship of sort of religious gurus and religious figures and sort of secular and politics in India is such a different arrangement than the United States. Whereas like these journalists and journalists, filmmakers, there's a whole group of folks who are invested in a kind of secular, pluralistic India, of which I think these folks that we see in this film are.
Right.
Now, not necessarily the parents and the people who left. Like, I don't think they are, right? But I think that there's a big... I think that there's a divide that is very different than the relationship that like CNN would have with say but like we did see this, like we don't think that the people at Vanity Fair, they're not like they definitely really have a different understanding of what the role of religion should be in American society.
No, 10,000%.
Hillsong.
What I'm trying to put my finger on is the extent to which religion, because we've talked a lot about like how cult is, religion and religious traditions that are different from what you identify as mainstream. And then these like abuses are happening inside of them. And so, ooh, cult.
Yeah.
I'm trying to figure out what exactly the role of religious faith or like the way that because the extent to which religious theology, like the teachings themselves are an abomination of like what it is that we are supposed to believe as devout Hindus.
Oh, no,
and
yeah.
so
I don't,
you know what I mean? Because like that's part of the thing with Heaven's Gate is like, or take your pick.
Yeah.
Is like, they believe that Christ rides on a spaceship. So obviously
Right.
they're messed up and weird. And like, so, ipso facto, of course, mass suicide because it just one follows the other.
Yeah.
And in this sense, and there are all sorts of like these tangles with, Jim Jones and, Mayor Moscone or like political leaders and what's his name, Lentz, Carl Lentz showing up with Oprah or whatever. Like that's always a presence, but like part of what gives us the justification to think of these groups as like wacky and weird and other and thus cults is like they don't believe the way we believe.
Right. Yeah, I think that the actual teachings of Asaram Bapu are part of a pretty standard,
pretty mainstream
tradition.
Because one of the things that I thought was interesting was that like at the very end, we hear the idea that like nature is going to sort stuff out.
Yeah.
Like nature is going to handle
Justice
stuff
will
and
happen.
You don't have to worry about it. But that message comes from both the spokeswoman for the ashram, who is fiercely defensive of Asaram, and we hear it from the fathers of two dead boys.
Yeah.
Who are fierce critics of Asaram.
Yeah.
And so the message itself is not something that is all that variant. The difference is so I guess then my question is like, why isn't this a story about like harm?
Yeah.
And
it's really a story about like, look at this law that worked.
Like so I am as ever curious about the role that this word cult and like how that functions for the story that we're telling and what stories it really kind of keeps us from going into because it keeps up and running. Like, because I also cult discourse, does seem a little, this is pseudo speculative, but like in as much as like cult watch as a phenomenon started coming up like after Jonestown.
Right.
To what extent is like cult discourse in the first place its own sort of...
Yeah. I mean, this is the only time that I've run into, like, I did not realize that this was it was produced by an indie production company for Warner Brothers with all these Indian, interviews and whatever for an Indian audience.
Sure. Except for Alexandra Stein.
Right. But like, and I went and looked at the production company, and it's like a relatively new production company.
Yeah.
And a lot of the other stuff they're making, like they made one of the things they have on their website. They don't even have this on their website, which is interesting. But one of the other things they do have on there is "Say Yes to the Dress, India."
Ooh, sure.
so there's something about like this is the first time I've encountered like cult discourse imported into an Indian context, and like. What I would have expected it to be kind of tagged to would be the black magic stuff, which is either, depending on what they
Right.
were referring to, either kind of folk, tribal, religious stuff,
Right. Right.
or that Hindutva types are like, oh, no, or Tantra, which is another side
interesting.
of the world.
I was expecting you to say, or like sexual exploitation and abuse, which often comes into the discourse on cults, except there are, and I cannot stress this enough, 40 million followers. And so
I
see also Catholic sex abuse.
I think
we do not call Catholicism a cult. I mean, I'm sure some people do, whatever. But like in terms of this like pop cult discourse and what is able to make its way into like, journalistic circles.
I think within the Indian context, the term cult, and I can only go, I think only in this case, and I'd be fascinated. Now I'm like, all right, we need to go do more digging around into where cult shows up in Indian media. But I think that it, in this case, is a reference to the quote unquote blind faith of the 40 million followers. Like, I think it's about a kind of mass religious politics that these men are able to deploy. Like, it's the threat of, I have 5,000 people outside.
So you think it's like actually a crypto critique of Hindu nationalism?
I think it's a crypto critique of Hindu nationalism, but especially this kind of guru movement that
but that's I guess what I'm trying to.
But not every guru movement has 40,000 followers who are willing
40 million,
or 40 million followers, and not every guru movement is deploying them in the streets.
Right.
Like, I think that, like, so you're talking about, like, within India, a country that has a history of religious identity violence.
Sure.
Right? Going from partition through, like,
Sure.
Ayodhya in 1992.
Yeah.
Usually against Hindus, against Muslims, but there's all sorts of versions of this. And so I think what this is trying to, the cult term is being like imported in from the West and applied to, in this case, what is scary, what is this mass politics hidden as religion,
I
right?
see.
Like, it's warping the justice system, it's warping everything else.
Okay.
And it's like what's behind the political, the right-wing political system.
Yeah.
I think that is the cult. In a way, so I think that the cult here functions the way Christian nationalism is functioning in the United States right now.
Right.
As a way to talk about,
but we would just, again, I mean, yeah. I mean, I think that here, as we have discussed before, like the term cult is really handy for folks where there is a nominal sense of like religious tolerance, religious pluralism, that also does not want to call itself a secular society. We still want to keep religion, read Christianity, like sacred and thus protected by tax code and removed from what we call cults.
And India is one of the only India was one of the first places, because of the way the British approached religion there.
Yeah.
At the same time that the United States is writing a constitution that carves out religious freedom.
Sure.
The British are carving out religious freedom in India.
Yeah.
Because they didn't want to mess with it.
Right.
Right. And so there's a very similar model of secularism in both places.
So I think that which,
to back up what you're saying.
Yes. Like so the documentary does not go into so many things, but then there are like these little nuggets of, I think, really fascinating, and it seems like really, rich and complicated histories or backstories that it could be about. So like much more interesting things that the documentary could have been about. I have a list.
You have a
one
list.
of them is
Okay.
one of them is this, what you're just saying, the political influence of religious leaders, right?
Yeah.
Asaram apparently like played a big role in, like, he's not just connected to, Narendra Modi, like the prime minister. He was like formative in Modi's rise to power. So that could be a thing. The Indian justice system and its handling of sex crimes, I found really fascinating, and I want to learn much more about that because, like I did have the same thing that you wrote down about the lawyer that called when he talked about the life imprisonment in 2018. He called it a historic judgment in the history of the country because it was the first time for such a judgment by the court. And so, like let's have a documentary about that because meanwhile, there are lots of sex criminals inside of the Catholic Church that like don't get prosecuted, like don't get paid, like and there have been documentaries about that. Sure. But again, like the way that something called cult gets deployed is very different. And also the extent to which those sex criminals do not face like a day in court is also like the Catholic Church has paid like $4 billion or something worldwide in settlements, but
one of the reasons, so like
they're not getting life imprisonment.
The law that allowed the ring boys to sue the WWE in Maryland, the biggest opponents of that law and fighting its constitutionality, that allowed people to sue way after the fact, was the Catholic Church of Baltimore, right? For obvious reasons. I was thinking
about Marcial Maciel when I was watching this. Like he's the Catholic priest who like was really prominent and who abused more than 60 minors. And he like whatever, like resigned and stuff and shame and whatever, but he died in like a house for priests in Florida. Like and so I just, when it comes to, again, like what is it that we think that we are getting at when we use the word cult, and what do we think it helps us explain, and what does it also help us kind of mystify in ways that allow us to tell the stories that we want to tell? So anyway, why cult of fear instead of like, here's a documentary about the Indian Penal Code where sex assault is concerned?
Because no one's going to watch that.
I would absolutely watch that.
I mean, maybe. I
know that I am not the demographic of so many things.
I do think there's an audience question here, though.
Sitting here wearing my Breeders t-shirt. Yes, go.
But no, I do think there's an audience question here about like, this was made for like, okay, if this was originally like the main source for this was supposed to be, or main place for this was supposed to be Discovery plus India.
Sure.
Right. So you're talking about a particular kind of like educated middle class audience of Indian people for whom like, who are basically seeing themselves in like the reporters and maybe seeing people they know or in their family in some of the families. Right.
Sure.
And so I think like what's interesting about that is figuring out like, what does cult mean in that context?
Okay, I don't disagree.
Right.
There's definite contextual specificity and difference and all of the things, for sure. But and also additionally, the thing that happens when we call something cult of fear and make it about this guy.
Oh yeah.
Like the subtitle's face his name of that dude is is what happens when we tell stories in the US about serial killers. It is, we know lots about, Ted Bundy was handsome, Jeffrey Dahmer was gay, whatever. Like we know about these people because we're fascinated by those people. We know, at least popularly, colloquially, as a society in conversation, virtually nothing about their victims.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. So I know what Ted Bundy looks like. What do I know about any of his victims?
So does this mean we're going to cover that new Charles Manson?
I would like to do it. I mean, or I think we could, like, because so I think that is something that does it keeps the focus regardless of context. And I don't want to take away from the specificity and the contextual, like, yeah, like I think what you're saying is absolutely right. But I do think also there is a way in which we get really easily tempted to keep the focus because it sells better, because it's more interesting, because it's a little sexier, about this villain.
Yeah.
Rather than the people who are on the receiving end of that villainy. Anyway.
Yeah. No, I think that's
that's what I want to talk about. That's what I got.
Is that your takeaway? Is that your takeaway?
Yeah, I mean, basically. I don't know.
All right, because I want to go a slightly different direction.
Okay.
Because I think for some reason I got really interested in this thing, not just as a cult documentary, but as an example of like our current global mediascape.
Okay.
And so like we talked about, we've said this before, that like, is there a cult if there isn't a camera pointed at it? Like Jonestown was not just Jonestown; it was a plane full of NBC cameras.
Yeah.
Waco, et cetera, et cetera. So, okay, if that's the case, then we have this globalized mediascape, and we have, like, it makes sense that the cult documentary would become a kind of global media genre. But I think what's interesting about this is like this is for an Indian streaming service originally, that in a world where, like, other than Netflix, almost every streaming service is losing money. Right? Like NBC, like Peacock is a massive, like, millions and millions and millions of dollars a year loss for NBC Universal.
Why do they keep it?
The idea is we're going to lose money now, build up a library, and that way when eventually the cord cutting everything will catch up and will be established or whatever. And WBD, I don't know if they're losing money on Max, but they're not. So WBD owns Max, they own Discovery Plus, they own like TNT and TBS and all these other cable stations too. So, but like, I don't know that they're making a ton of money. Like Discovery Plus and Max. The reason this showed up is because WBD, Warner Brothers bought Discovery. It became WBD.
Okay. I was trying to put that. I was like, was this Warner Brothers?
Yeah. So Warner Brothers
Discovery.
bought Discovery. Okay. So that's why this ends up on Max.
I see.
When it's a Discovery Plus thing, right?
Got it.
It's also why like the Garden one ended up on
Interesting.
Max because it was a Discovery production.
Okay.
So there's this so I'm fat. So maybe I'm the only one who finds this interesting, but I'm like, the idea then. So we talked about 40 million followers, right?
Yeah.
India, China, these are massive markets.
Sure.
For these companies, these streaming companies, these media companies.
Sure.
So there's a way at which, like, I think this is kind of a test shot. This is sort of a test shot of like, can we export the cult documentary as a genre? What would it look like what would it like to hire an all Indian production team to make it? Right? The idea, like, you make this thing and it's made for a certain kind of Indian audience. We have no idea. And I don't think there's any way to know like how many people have watched this on Discovery Plus in India or whatever.
Yeah.
But I do think it's interesting just as a kind of like media story, and that this is one of the things that is being sort of exported now, along with like if Love is Blind is happening. There's like a gajillion Love is Blinds that Netflix is pitching all over the world, right?
Yeah.
Like,
is there like a Real Housewives Jaipur?
I don't know if there's a Real Housewives because that's a Bravo product. And
I mean, like, as an idea, not that specifically.
But I think the Love is Blind example, like, there literally are like 50 of them around the world, right? And a lot of them in not Europe. Like someone was.
So we take the formula, package it, put it in a different context.
Yeah, I mean, say yes to the dress, like India, like I was just saying, like. So I think that's that now this is the first time I've run into the cult doc genre being.
You've done this with like Top Chef. Top Chef is all over the world.
Yeah. All these shows. So like, but also because these places are looking for new markets because the cable streaming math only adds up to make money for like sports really at this point. So it's really interesting, I think, on that level, and that this is the first time I've seen like the cult documentary because it fits that genre in so many, has so many of the notes of that genre
there was a similar like cover image of, have you seen yet? Has your algorithm like suggested that you watch My Daughter Joined a Cult?
Yes. Yes.
I haven't watched it yet, but that's and it may be a completely different context. I have no idea. But it's that same kind of like, here is a like head of a human who's looking creepy.
Yeah.
And I don't know, man.
But so much of that stuff is like, it's like Wild Wild Country. It's the Asian invasion story.
Yeah.
Right? Which is what I was interested to know what this was like.
Christian, like traditions inside of Christianity and South Asia, like South Asian religious traditions and Christianity is what we've hit up against a lot.
Yeah.
Like a lot of our examples come from those two domains.
Yeah.
There is, but with Christianity, and I guess this is what I'm trying to grapple with, is like inside of Christianity, we want to, or those productions want to maintain a really sharp boundary between what counts as religion, Christianity, and what counts as cult. That I don't see, like I don't see that work happening.
I don't think anyone questions though. Sense. Yeah, I mean, I think there are points that claim that Asaram is a con man, but there's no questioning the kind of authenticity of like the religiousness.
Yes. But we have to do that inside of our context because of what we want to maintain inside of the label called Christianity.
Right.
We need cult to mean something really specific, spiritually, dogmatically, traditionally, because we need Christianity to mean something really specific.
Right.
And so, and stay really protected with our tax law and stuff. And so I guess I'm interested in how those dynamics start to.
What was that guy in
out.
the Gwen Shamblin one that was really annoying? The guy from Tennessee, he was talking about what churches should do and then what this one, right?
Sure, an abomination. We don't have
that guy. Like Hinduism really says.
I mean, we have like from the whistleblower, like from people who were former devotees who do have a kind of like spirituality is really important to my life.
Yeah.
That is, we get a little bit of it in that sense of like, it's an abomination of, the faith that they do this or that, or they're hypocrites or whatever. So it's not that it doesn't exist, but the lengths to which, the production team goes to really tease that out in interviews is a little bit different in the context of the US.
Yeah. And I think like, so the two other examples I can think of like cult language in like this sort of outside the West context is like, there is a Netflix documentary in Korea called Holy Something, but it's about, I think it's still a Christian, because it's South Korea. I think it's still a Christian context, but it's a religious cult or what have you. Like, and then there's the other one is, the Epoch Times. Do you know this? So there's a group called Falun Gong in China that it's a form of qigong practice and whatever, but it's also been politically resistant to the Chinese government. They are also the ones behind the Epoch Times, which is this very far right American newspaper, like pro-Trump newspaper. Okay. That I found at my in-laws one time.
Okay.
They hadn't read it. It was just sent to them. Okay. I was like, you got on the wrong list.
Sure.
I did not. They don't listen. It's fine. But I have not stolen their phone yet.
Anyway.
But you
got to go teach. Come on.
Oh, sorry. But
Don't apologize to me.
The Chinese government has labeled Falun Gong a cult as a way to distance them and discredit them and et cetera, et cetera.
Yep.
Right. And so that's a very specific kind of like.
I think that it is, and we've talked about this before, but like, I think it is to do with that we go to lengths to explain something when it is inside of the when we need to distinguish it from something familiar.
Yeah.
Like so the role like because there wasn't that work done with the Rajneeshis either. Like they're inside the US, but there wasn't a lot of time or context or backstory given to like here's what their religious tradition was or should have been. Here's how they warped it to blah blah blah.
Yeah.
It's only inside of the context of this is something that we want to keep protecting that we then use that language of abomination, warping, corrupting, whatever.
Yeah.
Anyway, so it makes sense that it would be, the former followers, the fathers of these boys who were like operating in good faith that say this was a twisting of a thing. But
if you want a fun time, go on YouTube and find the trailer for this documentary and read all the comments from Asaram's disciples.
It does not sound like a fun time. Takeaways, cult favorites.
Cult
what do
favorite.
we
did takeaways.
Okay.
What's your cult favorite? It's blank. It's blank.
Well, it's blank. I mean, since I have all of these pages here,
your
like
printer?
Well,
printer's your cult favorite?
No, that's not my cult favorite. We just got back from spring break, and among other things that I did on that week, I don't know. I was going through a lot of like boxes of old stuff trying to organize, and so I found all of these like old like letters and notes and I don't know. People may still do that, but like I pulled out a typewriter and I know, and I wrote like a couple of letters to people and like put a little stamp on it and put it in the mail. I don't know, old time's sake or something, and maybe it's because I was an English major and like my friends and I really liked sending letters. Maybe it was something unique to our demographic. But I'm gonna give a cult favorite to writing and mailing a letter.
Yeah.
Does that make me a dinosaur?
No.
It does.
I wrote and mailed a letter the other day to the governor.
So send notes. Send notes in the mail. It feels like such a treat now.
I love getting mail.
Yeah.
To this day, like it
feels like such a little prize.
I get so excited about mail.
Yeah. Anyway.
Yeah. So mine also over spring break, one of the things we did was go to a couple like antique mall / consignment shop stuff places. And one of the things I love about those places is, well, one, I found an original 1998 Sting action figure. It's over there.
Oh my God.
I should have made that. It's on the shelf over there, off camera, for $30.
Sting, not the musical recording artist. Sting, the just to give some.
If you get the video, you can see it's a giant giant thing. Anyways, that was not my cool favorite. What I did find is you sit right here, buddy. What I did find was a pair of Jordan 1s.
Okay.
That I didn't. I've been wanting a pair of Jordans for years, but I don't have money.
Yeah.
I have money. My partner won't let me spend it on shoes, and which is good because it'd be a problem. But they were $45, but they were really stained, and I learned from the internet that a mix of baking soda and water.
Did you Google this while you were at
I did.
the
I
store?
Googled. Well, no, I Googled it after. I was like, I can clean those. I bet.
Okay.
And for baking soda and water, you make a little paste like out of it, and like
you
cleaned them up.
You do that for like you do baking soda and water for like wasp stings too.
All right.
Do you ever do that?
No.
Yeah.
I just avoid wasps. Actually, I didn't know that. I've been stung by wasps multiple times.
Yeah. If you get stung by a bee or something, then like put a little baking soda and water.
Okay.
A little paste.
There you go.
Yeah.
But no, they cleaned up perfectly, looked brand new, and then I like Googled it, and I'm like, these are $250 shoes.
So now are you going to sell them?
No, I'm going to wear them. I should have worn them today to put them on camera, but no, I'm going to wear them. They're amazing.
Hello.
They're the Jordan 1 mid brushstroke. If you want to look it up. No, but like I'm here. So my cult favorite is
you can wear them when we talk about Last Dance.
Well, and I will say this. Yeah, we do.
You do
The other day, a while back, we were at a meeting together, and you had on some sweet Nikes, and I was like, "Those are great shoes." And you're like, "I got them at a thrift store." And I was like,
"Well, you know,
filed
ever
that away.
since, I mean, I do try to shop at thrift stores when I shop for clothing, but after we talked about Brandy Hellville,
Yeah,
that has only, I have like, revamped my.
I also got this shirt at a thrift store.
Okay.
Which says "Awesome" since 1984.
All right.
And it has some
could
kid
go through my jackets from a thrift store.
Anyways.
Okay. Okay, bye.
Bye. Thanks for listening to Cult Favorite.
Drop page.
Subscribe to the podcast. Leave us a rating and a review. And thank you to the Department of Religious Studies at the University of Alabama for production assistance
and for their printing supplies. Hey!
Actually, I need to get new toner from my printer in my office.
Toner.
Is
that going to mess up your
I should call the Rajneeshis.
They will sell it to you. They will upsell.
Yeah. All right. We'll see y'all in 2 weeks.
Teaching's going to be great.